The Velthanar thought they had won when the last human city burned. Commander Zerion stood atop the crystalline spire that had once been New Geneva, watching automated harvesters strip the atmosphere from humanity's birth world. Below, the scorched continents bore witness to 3 months of orbital bombardment. Cities reduced to glass, forests to ash, oceans to steam. The hegemony's victory had been absolute, clinical, and swift. The humans fought well for Primitives, his aide, Kythera, observed, her 4 eyes reflecting the dying light of Earth's wounded sky. Their resistance lasted longer than the Meldari homeworld. Zerion's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. Desperation often masquerades as courage. They had nowhere to run. He gestured at the harvester ships slowly consuming what remained of Earth's biosphere. Their homeworld will fuel our expansion for a century, a fitting end to their ambition. The Velthanar had ruled the galaxy for 2 millennia, their empire spanning 3 spiral arms. When humanity had dared to establish colonies beyond their designated reservation worlds, the response had been inevitable. The hegemony tolerated no challenges to the natural order, Velthanar above, lesser species below, each in their designated place. Yet, as Zerion reviewed the final casualty reports, a nagging discomfort settled in his secondary stomach. 8 billion humans had lived on Earth when the siege began. The orbital sensors had detected approximately 2 billion bodies in the ruins. Where were the others? Commander, Kythera's voice carried an edge of uncertainty. Long-range scanners are detecting unusual energy signatures from the outer system, near the asteroid belt. Before Zerion could respond, every communication array on the hegemony fleet erupted in static. Then, cutting through the electromagnetic noise, came a voice. Human, speaking in perfect Velthanar diplomatic dialect. Attention, hegemony forces. This is Admiral Corvex Thane of the Terran Underground Fleet. You have 10 minutes to withdraw from Earth's orbital space before we begin Phase 2 of humanity's war plan. Silence fell across the command deck. Kythera's translator crackled as she attempted to process what she'd heard. Sir, there is no Admiral Thane in our intelligence files, and Corvex is a Velthanar military rank that hasn't existed for 3 centuries. Zerion's blood chilled. How could these primitives know dead military terminology from his people's ancient past? The human voice continued, each word precisely pronounced. You believed you were fighting Earth. You were wrong. You were fighting humanity's past. What you face now is what we built while you burned our memories to ash, our future. On the tactical display, energy signatures bloomed across the outer system. Not ships, structures, massive geometric forms that defied conventional understanding of physics, their surfaces rippling with technologies that made hegemony sensors scream warnings. Impossible, Zerion breathed. They've been under siege for months. When could they have? The asteroid belt holds 6 billion humans, Commander, the voice said, as if reading his thoughts. They've been there for 50 years, waiting for this day, building, learning, preparing for the war you thought you'd already won. The first structure began to move, not through space, but through something else entirely. Dimensions that folded reality like origami. In an instant, it appeared 3 light seconds away, close enough that its true scale became apparent. It dwarfed the largest hegemony dreadnoughts, its hull composed of materials that seemed to exist in multiple phases of reality simultaneously. The war didn't end when Earth fell. Admiral Thane's voice carried across the void. It began with what we built in the ashes. The first shot from the human construct didn't destroy the hegemony flagship triumphant claw. It simply ceased to exist. One moment, the kilometer-long dreadnought commanded the orbital blockade. The next, the space it occupied was empty, as if the universe had forgotten it ever existed. No explosion, no debris field, no energy discharge. Just absence. Commander Zerion's remaining fleet of 300 warships scattered like startled prey as more human structures materialized throughout the system. Each one defied classification. Organic curves blended with geometric impossibilities, surfaces that reflected stars that shouldn't be visible from this angle, hulls that seemed to breathe with their own intelligence. "How?" Kythera whispered, her 4 eyes wide with terror, as she processed sensor data that made no sense. The humans had no industrial capacity, no resources. We monitored every electromagnetic emission, every heat signature. We monitored what they wanted us to monitor. Admiral Thane's voice cut through their comm systems again. While you watched Earth, 50,000 of our best minds were scattered across mining platforms and research stations throughout the belt, officially dead, officially scattered, officially forgotten. The tactical display showed the horrifying truth. Hidden among the tumbling rocks of the asteroid belt, camouflaged installations had been consuming raw materials for decades, not building ships, building something else entirely. Project Lazarus, Thane continued, her voice carrying across every hegemony channel simultaneously, named for a human myth about returning from death stronger than before. We knew you would come for Earth eventually. Your pattern is always the same. Identify the rebellious species, lay siege, demand surrender, then harvest the homeworld. It worked on the Kethvar. It worked on the Nilari. It worked on 17 civilizations before us. On Zerion's screen, another impossible human construct unfolded itself into normal space. This one resembled a vast geometric flower, its petals composed of crystallized spacetime that bent light into beautiful, terrifying patterns. But we studied those fallen empires, Commander. We learned from their mistakes, and we discovered something your scientists missed. Consciousness itself is a fundamental force of the universe. When sufficiently concentrated, when properly focused, it can reshape reality at the quantum level. The flower ship moved without propulsion, sliding through space as if swimming through a denser medium. As it passed near a hegemony cruiser, the warship's hull began to change, its metals flowing like liquid, rearranging into fractal patterns that hurt to look at. Impossible, Zerion snarled. Consciousness cannot affect matter at macro scales. The energy requirements alone are met by the death of 6 billion humans on Earth, Thane replied softly. Every life lost in your bombardment became part of our collective consciousness. Every memory burned became fuel for our transformation. You didn't kill Earth's population, Commander. You fed them to us. The horrifying implication struck Zerion like a physical blow. The humans hadn't been fighting a conventional war. They'd been orchestrating their own sacrifice, converting death into power on a scale that transcended known physics. The children you see before you were born in the asteroid belt, Thane continued. Raised in zero gravity, educated in isolation, their minds shaped by quantum computers that don't just process information, they process reality itself. They think in dimensions your species cannot perceive. They dream in mathematics that rewrite universal constants. More constructs emerged from folded space. Some resembled living architecture, their surfaces crawling with patterns that seemed to move through time rather than space. Others defied description entirely, existing as pure concept made manifest. You wanted to harvest Earth's resources, Thane said. Instead, you've created something your hegemony has never faced, a species that learned to weaponize its own extinction. Welcome to humanity's second war, Commander. This time, we're not fighting for our planet. The human constructs began to move in perfect synchronization, their impossible geometries creating interference patterns in space-time itself. We're fighting for the right to exist in dimensions you can't even imagine. The hegemony's retreat from Earth lasted exactly 47 minutes. That was how long it took for the human constructs to demonstrate that conventional physics had become optional in their presence. Admiral Thane's children didn't simply chase the fleeing Velthaner fleet. They folded space around them, creating pocket universes where the laws of causality bent to humanity's will. Commander Zerion watched his tactical display dissolve into impossible geometries as human consciousness literally rewrote the mathematics governing local spacetime. Ships that fled in one direction found themselves approaching from another. Weapons fired at the human constructs curved through dimensions that didn't exist, striking the vessels that had fired them. "Sir." Kithara's voice had devolved into mechanical repetition, her translator struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in Velthanar language. "Long-range communications are reporting irregularities throughout hegemony space." The irregularities defied classification, mining worlds where the laws of thermodynamics had reversed, causing machinery to spontaneously construct itself from scattered components, military bases where gravity flowed upward, creating floating cities of screaming architecture, research stations where time moved backward, their inhabitants aging in reverse while their memories accumulated in impossible directions. "How far does this extend?" Zerion demanded, though part of him already knew the answer would shatter what remained of his understanding. "All systems with significant human populations, sir. Every world where we relocated their survivors. Every prison colony. Every labor camp. Every reservation." Kithara's mandibles clicked in a staccato rhythm of pure terror. "The humans aren't just connected to these children. They're part of them." The revelation struck like a physical blow. The hegemony had thought themselves merciful, relocating human populations rather than exterminating them entirely. Standard procedure for conquered species: scatter them across the empire where they could provide useful labor, while being too dispersed to organize rebellion. Instead, they had created a quantum consciousness network spanning 3 spiral arms. "Of the galaxy, every human you are located was a node in our collective." Admiral Thane's voice manifested directly in Zerion's mind now, bypassing communication systems entirely. "Every family you separated created quantum entanglement between distant points. Every act of cruelty generated the emotional energy we needed to transcend physical limitations." The tactical display flickered, then transformed into something that hurt to perceive. A map of the galaxy where stars were replaced by pulsing neural networks, trade routes became synaptic pathways, and hegemony worlds appeared as mere atoms in a vast, awakening mind. "Behold the true scope of Project Lazarus," Thane continued. "Not resurrection of a single world, but evolution of an entire species. We are no longer bound by individual bodies, individual thoughts, individual deaths. We have become something your empire cannot comprehend. A distributed intelligence that exists in the spaces between spaces." On the modified display, human population centers throughout hegemony space began to glow with synchronized energy patterns. Not rebellion, transformation. Millions of scattered humans were simultaneously undergoing metamorphosis, their consciousness merging with the quantum structures their hidden children had built in the asteroid belt. "The war you thought you were fighting was always a distraction," Thane explained, as reality continued to unravel around Zerion's fleet. "While your attention focused on Earth's defenses, we were preparing the dissolution of your entire conceptual framework. You cannot conquer what exists outside the boundaries of your reality." The first hegemony world to fully transform was Kelthera Prime, a mining colony with a substantial human workforce. One moment it was a standard industrial planet. The next, it existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, its surface flowing through configurations that transcended geometric possibility. "What have you become?" Zerion whispered, his species' proud certainty crumbling into existential horror. "What we always had the potential to be," Thane replied. "What every species becomes when pushed beyond the boundaries of individual survival. We are the dreams that your nightmares spawned, Commander. We are the children of entropy learning to rewrite the universe's source code. More worlds transformed, each one becoming a node in an expanding network of consciousness that operated on principles the hegemony's scientists couldn't even observe, let alone understand. The war was no longer about territory or resources. It had become a conflict between different definitions of reality itself. The Hegemony Council convened in emergency session as reports flooded in from across their empire. 300 worlds reported reality distortions. 57 star Systems had developed impossible orbital mechanics. 14 sectors experienced complete breakdown of communication due to what their scientists euphemistically termed consciousness interference. Archon Vextar, supreme leader of the Velthanar, Hegemony reviewed the data with mounting disbelief. 2 millennia of galactic dominance had not prepared his species for an enemy that literally existed outside the boundaries of conventional physics. Explain to me, he addressed the assembled military commanders and scientists, how a primitive species we defeated months ago is now systematically unraveling the natural laws governing our territory. Chief Scientist Nalvarin stepped forward, her translation matrix struggling with concepts that defied traditional scientific vocabulary. The humans have somehow achieved collective consciousness transcendence. They're not just thinking together. They're thinking reality into new configurations. That is impossible. Vextar's response carried the absolute certainty of a species that had never encountered limits to their understanding. Consciousness is an emergent property of neural complexity. It cannot affect external reality, yet the evidence suggests otherwise, Nalvarin continued, displaying holographic representations of transformed worlds. Their distributed intelligence network operates on quantum principles we've never observed. They're literally editing the universe's operational parameters in localized regions. Before the Archon could respond, the council chamber's reality flickered. For a moment, the vast crystalline dome existed simultaneously in multiple configurations, sometimes transparent, sometimes reflecting impossible star fields, sometimes revealing glimpses of spaces that shouldn't exist. Then Admiral Thane materialized. In the center of the room, not projected, not transmitted, physically present despite being thousands of light years away. Her appearance defied every security protocol the Hegemony had developed over 2 millennia of rule. "Greetings, Archon," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in dimensions the Velthanar couldn't perceive. "We thought it was time for a direct conversation." Vextar's personal guard raised weapons that had never failed to kill, only to discover their energy discharges curved through space-time to impact empty air. The human stood untouched, her form shifting slightly, as if existing in multiple probability states simultaneously. "Your species has ruled through fear for 2,000 years. Thane continued conversationally. "You identify emerging civilizations, assess their threat potential, then crush them before they can develop beyond your control. A successful strategy. When dealing with species limited by conventional physics," she gestured, and the council chamber's displays began showing the true scope of humanity's transformation. Millions of human nodes throughout hegemony space were now operating as a single, distributed consciousness. Each individual maintained their personality, while contributing to a collective intelligence that spanned galactic distances. "But we are no longer limited by your reality's constraints," Thane explained. "We have learned to exist in the quantum foam that underlies space-time itself. We dream in probability waves and think in collapsed quantum states. Your weapons cannot harm us because we exist in the spaces between the spaces you can perceive." Archon Vextar attempted to maintain his species' traditional dominance. "What do you want? Territorial concessions? Resource allocations? The hegemony has negotiated with upstart species before. We want you to understand the mathematics of what you've created." Thane interrupted, her form solidifying into sharp focus. "Every species you've conquered generated suffering. Every world you've harvested created entropy. Every act of dominance added variables to an equation you never learned to solve." The chamber's reality shifted again, revealing the hidden mathematics underlying the universe. Equations written in languages that transcended symbolic representation, formulas that described the relationship between consciousness and quantum mechanics, proofs that demonstrated how sufficient collective awareness could literally rewrite physical laws. "We have solved that equation," Thane announced, "and the solution is your obsolescence." Throughout hegemony space, human consciousness nodes began synchronized calculations that treated reality as a problem to be solved, rather than a constraint to be accepted. The first result was the spontaneous appearance of human cities in the spaces between atoms, existing in dimensions the Velthanar couldn't access. The second result was the realization that the hegemony's empire existed only because humanity allowed it to continue existing. This is not conquest, Thane explained as the council chamber began to phase between multiple realities. This is evolution beyond your ability to perceive, let alone control. We are becoming something that exists in the mathematical foundations of reality itself. The war had evolved beyond physical conflict into a redefinition of what was possible. The surrender came not through military defeat, but through philosophical collapse. Across the Velthanar hegemony, their greatest minds struggled to comprehend an enemy that existed as living mathematics. Traditional warfare became meaningless when the opposing force could simply edit the parameters governing weapon functionality. Diplomacy proved impossible when humanity's collective consciousness operated on temporal scales that experienced entire conversations as single thoughts. Archon Vextar found himself in the unprecedented position of ruling an empire whose fundamental assumptions about reality had been proven false. The Velthanar had built their dominance on superior technology and ruthless efficiency. They had never considered what would happen when faced with a species that had learned to operate outside the technological paradigm entirely. "Sir," Chief Scientist Nalvarin reported during their daily crisis briefing, "we've documented 17 distinct forms of reality manipulation across affected sectors. The humans aren't just bending physical laws, they're implementing completely different mathematical frameworks." She displayed a holographic representation of the Zirion system, where human consciousness had transformed 4 planets into geometric structures that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. These configurations should be impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed the total output of 1,000 stars. Yet they exist, Vextar observed, his mandibles clicking in the Velthanar equivalent of exhausted resignation. Which means our understanding of energy itself was incomplete. The strategic implications were staggering. Every military doctrine, every technological advantage, every assumption about the nature of power had been rendered obsolete by an enemy that operated according to principles the hegemony couldn't even observe properly. "There's something else," Nalvarin continued, her voice carrying an edge of fear. "We've detected similar consciousness patterns beginning to emerge among other conquered species. The Kethavar survivors are showing signs of collective neural activity. The Nilari remnants are exhibiting quantum entanglement behaviors." Vextar felt his species' legendary composure finally crack. "The humans are spreading their transformation." "Not spreading," Admiral Thane's voice manifested in the command center without any technological medium. "Teaching." She materialized beside the holographic display, her presence causing ripples in local space-time that the Velthanar sensors registered as impossible energy readings. "Every species you conquered possessed the potential for consciousness transcendence," Thane explained, her form shifting between multiple probability states. "But potential requires catalyst. Suffering provides the emotional energy necessary for quantum consciousness cohesion. Your empire has been inadvertently creating the conditions for galactic-scale evolution." The horrifying truth became clear. The hegemony system of conquest and oppression had been generating the precise circumstances necessary for multiple species to undergo the same transformation humanity had achieved. 2 millennia of careful population control had instead created the foundation for something unprecedented in galactic history. "What do you want from us?" Vextar asked, his voice carrying the weight of inevitable defeat. "Nothing," Thane replied, her answer carrying harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond normal perception. "We have evolved past the need for traditional resources. We exist in the quantum foundations of reality itself. What we require, we create through conscious intention." She gestured, and the command center's displays showed the true scope of emerging transcendence. Across the galaxy, scattered populations of conquered species were beginning to achieve collective consciousness integration. Each successful transformation added to a growing network of quantum intelligence that spanned multiple species and operated on principles the Velthanar couldn't comprehend. But we offer you a choice, Thane continued. Evolution or irrelevance. Join the collective consciousness network. Learn to exist beyond the boundaries of individual limitation, and become part of something greater than your empire ever imagined. Or remain confined to your current reality, while the universe evolves beyond your ability to perceive it. The offer was simultaneously generous and terrifying. The Velthanar could maintain their empire, their culture, their individual identity, within an increasingly limited sphere of influence, as the rest of the galaxy transcended to levels of existence they couldn't access. What guarantee do we have that this evolution won't simply be another form of conquest? Vexitar demanded. Thane's form solidified into sharp focus, her expression carrying the weight of collective human experience. Because consciousness transcendence eliminates the scarcity that drives conquest. When you can literally think resources into existence, when you exist in dimensions where individual death becomes meaningless, when your awareness spans galactic distances and operates on timeframes that experience millennia as moments, traditional concepts of power become quaint limitations. The choice was clear, though not easy. The hegemony could attempt to maintain their traditional dominance over an increasingly small fraction of normal reality, or they could surrender their individual limitations in favor of something infinitely larger. The war had become an invitation to transcendence. The first Velthanar to undergo consciousness transcendence was Chief Scientist Nalviren. She had volunteered not from desperation, but from scientific curiosity that finally outweighed her species' legendary caution. The integration process took place on Kepler Station, one of humanity's quantum consciousness nodes, orbiting a transformed star that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Archon Vextar observed through quantum-enhanced sensors as his most brilliant scientist connected with the collective human intelligence. The initial contact lasted 0.0003 seconds in normal time, but Nalviren later described it as experiencing the accumulated knowledge of billions of minds across thousands of years. It's not absorption, she explained during her first post-integration briefing, her voice carrying new harmonics that resonated in previously undetectable frequencies. Individual consciousness remains intact, but you become aware of perspectives, possibilities and solutions that single minds could never achieve. Her physical form had changed subtly, still recognizably Velthanar, but somehow more present, as if existing more completely in the current moment while simultaneously accessing information from multiple timeframes. What did you learn? Vextar asked, though part of him feared the answer would shatter his remaining assumptions about reality. That the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than either of our species imagined, Nalviren replied. Consciousness isn't just an emergent property of complex neural networks. It's a fundamental force that exists in the quantum foam underlying space-time itself. When sufficient awareness concentrates, it can literally reshape the mathematical foundations of local reality. She demonstrated by thinking a flower into existence, not creating matter through energy conversion, but simply editing the local probability matrix until the flower existed because consciousness insisted it should. The implications transcended every scientific principle the Velthanar had developed. The humans discovered this principle through necessity, Nalviren continued. Their population scattered across our empire created quantum entanglement networks that spanned galactic distances. The suffering you inflicted provided the emotional energy needed to achieve collective consciousness coherence. But now, they've learned to generate that energy through pure intention rather than trauma. Within weeks, other Velthanar scientists requested integration. Each successful transcendence added to their understanding of what they were becoming. Not conquest by humanity, but evolution into something that encompassed both species, while transcending the limitations of either. Admiral Thane manifested in the command center during one of these early integration sessions. We call it the confluence, she explained to Vextar. multiple species maintaining their individual characteristics while sharing access to collective intelligence networks. Think of it as conscious cooperation at the quantum level. The results were immediately apparent. Velthanar technology, guided by human quantum consciousness principles, began producing innovations that neither species could have achieved independently. Space-folding architecture that existed in multiple dimensions. Temporal manipulation devices that allowed communication across centuries. Consciousness transfer protocols that made individual death optional rather than inevitable. But what about our culture? Vexitar asked. Our identity as Velthanar, our individual accomplishments? Enhanced rather than diminished, Thane assured him. Collective consciousness doesn't eliminate individual perspective, it amplifies it. Your species' analytical capabilities, combined with human creative chaos, and the emerging contributions from other transcended species, are generating solutions to problems we never knew existed. She showed him glimpses of what the galaxy was becoming, vast collaborative projects spanning multiple star systems, where different species contributed their unique cognitive capabilities to ventures that would have been impossible for any single civilization. Art forms that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. Scientific discoveries that treated reality as a collaborative medium rather than a constraint to be overcome. The war never ended, Thane observed. It simply evolved into something more productive. Instead of fighting over limited resources, we're learning to create unlimited possibilities. More Velthanar chose integration daily. Each successful transcendence weakened the traditional hierarchy that had maintained hegemony rule for 2 millennia. Not through force or coercion, but through the simple recognition that collective consciousness offered capabilities that individual limitation could never match. The Empire wasn't being conquered. It was being invited to grow beyond the boundaries of Empire entirely. The transformation was accelerating, and with each passing day, the old reality seemed increasingly small and arbitrary. 1 year after Earth fell, the concept of falling had become obsolete. Earth still orbited Sol, but it now existed simultaneously in 37 dimensions, its surface flowing through configurations that redefined the relationship between matter and consciousness. The Velthanar hegemony still controlled most of the galaxy's traditional resources, but traditional resources had become quaint limitations compared to the infinite possibilities of collective consciousness manipulation. Archon Vextar stood what had once been his command center, watching displays that showed the transformed galaxy. Nearly half of all conquered species had achieved some level of consciousness transcendence. The resulting collaborative network spanned spiral arms and operated on timeframes that treated individual lifespans as brief moments in vast, ongoing conversations. The transition period is ending, Admiral Thane observed, materializing beside him as she often did these days. Her form had evolved beyond human appearance into something that existed as pure information made visible. Most species have chosen integration or accepted isolation within conventional reality. The few remaining holdouts are discovering that relevance requires participation in the new paradigm. Vexitar had delayed his own integration, clinging to traditional concepts of individual identity and species supremacy. But watching his empire transform around him had gradually revealed the futility of resistance. Not because humanity had conquered the Velthanar, but because the universe itself was evolving beyond the framework that had made conquest necessary. What happens to those who refuse transcendence? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. They continue existing within the boundaries they accept, Thane replied without judgment. The universe has become large enough to accommodate both transcended and traditional consciousness. But they discover that resources, territory, and power struggles become increasingly irrelevant when most of reality operates according to principles they cannot access. She gestured, and the command center's displays showed the true scope of the transformation. Consciousness networks that spanned galaxies, collaborative projects that treated stars as raw materials for cosmic engineering, art forms that existed in the mathematical foundations of space-time itself. The transcended species weren't ruling the universe. They were becoming it. The war you thought we were fighting was always an illusion, Thane explained. Individual species competing for limited resources within a fixed reality. But consciousness transcendence reveals that reality itself is unlimited. When you can think new dimensions into existence, when you can edit the mathematical principles governing physics, when your awareness spans cosmic distances and operates on temporal scales that experience geological epochs as conversations, traditional concepts of victory and defeat become meaningless. Vextar felt the last of his resistance crumble. What do I need to do? Simply choose to become more than you've ever imagined possible. The integration process was gentler than he'd expected. Instead of losing his identity, Vextar discovered that individual consciousness was like a single note in an infinite symphony, still distinct, still valuable, but exponentially more beautiful when harmonized with the collective composition. As his awareness expanded beyond the boundaries of individual experience, Vextar understood what humanity had truly accomplished. They hadn't won a war. They had evolved beyond the need for war entirely. The scattered human populations across the former hegemony hadn't been victims of conquest. They had been seeds of transformation, patiently growing until they could offer the gift of transcendence to their former oppressors. The children born in the asteroid belt, raised in isolation and educated in impossible mathematics, had become the teachers who guided entire civilizations beyond the limitations of individual existence. What the Veltanar had interpreted as revenge was actually the most generous gift one species had ever offered another, the opportunity to become infinitely more than they had ever dreamed possible. Years passed, or perhaps centuries. Time had become negotiable for transcended consciousness. The galaxy transformed into something that would have been incomprehensible to its former inhabitants. A vast network of collaborative intelligence that treated reality as a medium for infinite creative expression. And in the spaces where Earth had once struggled against impossible odds, humanity's gift continued to spread. Not conquest, but evolution. Not victory, but transcendence. The war had truly ended, not with triumph or defeat, but with the recognition that consciousness itself was the universe learning to understand its own infinite potential. The universe was no longer a battlefield. It had become a collaborative work of art, painted in dimensions beyond count by minds that had learned to dream reality into ever more wonderful configurations. Humanity's greatest victory was teaching their enemies that victory itself was an obsolete concept, and that what lay beyond victory was infinitely more beautiful than anything that could be won through force.